temperatures should not be a problem. While they may be stable as far as higher temperatures are concerned for a certain period of time, but one should understand that liquid vaccines, if they go below sub-zero temperatures, then they start deteriorating, they start breaking up, and that's where reactions could occur, and that's a dangerous arena that one gets into. So when I mentioned in the beginning that when you talk of cold chain, it's not only the plus side, but also the minus side, which needs to be given attention to. At times, some of these countries where we supply internationally can go to the other extreme of also insisting on cold chain for sterile water for injection, which is used as a diluent. But then this does happen, and one needs to sort of, end up educating those handling agencies in the recipient countries about the proper cold chain that is required, in which, I mean, some of the regulations are different for vaccines, and for diluents, you need to have a different set of conduct that needs to be performed.
While we are on the subject of thermostability, I am tempted to ask Mr. Harish his viewpoints on possible innovations on the horizon as far as thermostability is concerned, and maybe Mr. Kulkarni also would like to address it once to take it forward.
Well, I think that after having joined Shanta, I've been thinking about what we could innovate on. I mean, I think, so just stepping back for 1 minute, right? Why is it that there is VVMs on vaccine vials? And I worked on lots of products, pharmaceutical products. None of them seem to have this VVM type of concept. Okay, that's just fundamentally when you ask that question, you realize that the VVM concept really comes about because we're talking about developing countries, remote areas, hard to reach areas. Whereas you would never have this for a highly expensive product. Companies are always very careful. You have very, very good, you know whom to reach in a private market sense, right? So then when you turn that question on its head and say, why is this a problem? It's because of infrastructure. It's because of infrastructure. And do we expect the cold chain infrastructure to change dramatically to handle all the vaccines we want to deliver? Probably not. It's a huge, humongous investment that's required to change it. Then we look at it from a patient perspective or an end user customer perspective. You don't want to, first of all, you don't want to make a lot of vaccine and maybe throw away 30 to 40% of it because there's a cold chain problem at the end of the day and return it. It's a huge waste of resources globally, right? You've made all this effort, you've struggled to put it into place, and presumably one of the objectives is the public health objective, not just, of course it matters from a revenues perspective also, but really a public health objective is not met. So when you look at that, one of the needs that I could think of was that you need something in a thermostable regime. Now we have a lot of people working on it. I think Gates also has backed companies knowing very well that this is a problem. I can see Srimanta nodding his head in front of me because it's something that people have recognized very extensively. Okay, so for this, the vaccine industry, unfortunately, this is not a key point for innovation in so-called advanced markets, advanced economies, because they already have good cold chain. It's a problem that's specific to the industry that serves the emerging markets. That's my view at least. If you had to supply in Europe, of course, if I talk to my regulatory colleagues in France, they say, no, by the way, it's a problem even there. Sometimes it goes out of chain. Just imagine if it goes out of cold chain in Europe or the US or Japan or all these places with very great infrastructure, wonderful infrastructure. You can imagine what would happen in interior Andhra Pradesh or interior Gujarat or Africa or wherever, or Latin America, where the infrastructure is not so developed. So I think clearly there is a need. So from an innovation perspective, from making a difference, we need to think about these things. So here is the next question, right? So how do you think about this? A lot of it you have to use the science that we have used in other industry. You have to do rational design. Again, in my mind, if you have a very complex vaccine, it's harder to do this. If you have well-defined vaccines, well-defined molecules as vaccines, and that may be the future, right? It's innovation in the future. People are talking about well-defined vaccines. If you have well-defined vaccines, then you have well-defined degradation pathways. And I'm being scientific here because that's my background, right? My background is science. Can we identify well-defined pathways? Then you can talk about stabilizing around those pathways. What happens if it becomes -5? What happens if it becomes +15 or +40? How do you work around that? So I think really it's about rational design of vaccines to meet specific needs. Okay? So I think there are, again, many companies working on this kind of a premise. Okay? For example, another product that I've worked on in the past is insulin. People have talked about room temperature stable insulin. Okay, there's a completely different formulation-based approach. So you could take a formulation-based approach, molecular design-based approach. There are many approaches that are possible, and this is something that and the vaccine industry is quite old, unfortunately, and I think the innovation maybe not as much in this area. I think this is something that maybe we should work towards in the future.
I would like to carry this question and to Mr. Mahesh, slightly rephrasing it. On one hand, we have this issues of thermostability, and then possible innovations that can overcome this challenge. But as of now, addressing the current needs, when we have a cool pack, we have a thermocol box, and you are currently operating in the market. Is there any standardization of these cool packs? Are there any way to validate whether they would integrate, maintain the cold chain integrity for 72 hours or possibly 96 hours and so on and so forth? Any insights into that?
Yeah, I think there are very defined systems and methodologies to prove and validate that your package withstands the requirement of the extreme or hostile temperatures like -5 and +43. They are derived out of the WHO guidance document. It is left to the manufacturer in terms of what they just say you have to follow this guidance from WHO in terms of validating a chain, cold chain, etc. But if I am transferring this particular product into my custody, into some place in Calcutta or in Bihar, there is no assurance or there's no way that they can check that it was delivered in 72 hours. So what actually happens is that though you have a package which is validated for a defined period, some crazy driver of the truck who is driving it stops the cold, the cold unit or the compressor in between. And then the exposure to the higher temperature is unknown at the time of destination. What they probably are just receiving is the physical quantity of this. Then this gets further aggravated, like Harish very clearly said. I think that's a very important point, is infrastructure. First is education, the second is infrastructure. At least, I can tell you I have an experience of 20 different very remote destinations in India in different states. When we investigated the matter, all these places do not get power for 12 hours a day, So where is the backup system? They have no funds to equip this with the UPS, with the generators, etc. So
yeah, we'll hold on to that point. But before that, a small clarification: is there any BIS standards or ISI standards or some standards for the cool pack, so that that okay, if I source it from this, there is a particular integrity attached to it?
Actually, in terms of the package, how you designed it, it is up to you. You have to validate it as required. You have to prove that your pre-incubation of your bricks have to be at a particular level for that particular period. However, the WHO guidance is very specific on what it needs to achieve. So there is a standard what it needs to achieve for the intended purpose.
But primarily, I carry the impression that it is left to the companies to validate rather than some third-party validation.
Yeah, I think the most important part here is that you have to achieve the safety of the product for that particular period. And obviously you have very few options with you that you need to kind of design a package through. And most of us actually follow more or less the same type of structure in terms of packing the vial. It's not very different, for packing of the vaccine.
I'll hold on to that point and again revisit the electricity and the ILR issue. But before that, I have a question to Dr. Dodwadkar. Since you have been probably using VVMs for your international shipments, Do you feel that making VVM, of course, partly it was answered by Mahesh saying that it's not mandatory that it will increase the cold chain integrity.